Have you ever thought about how dangerous a book can be? Not a spell book from a fantasy story, but a real book, one that could get you thrown in jail or worse. Today, we're diving into the story of two of the most dangerous books in history, written by two of the most revolutionary thinkers, Nicolaus Copernicus and Galileo Galilei. Their ideas didn't just change science, they shook the very foundations of society and power. Let's travel back to the early 1500s. For over 1,000 years, the entire Western world believed that the Earth was the center of the universe. The sun, the moon, the planets, and all the stars revolved around us. This wasn't just a scientific model, it was a matter of divine order. The Ptolemaic system, as it was called, placed humanity at the heart of God's creation. Everything had its place, and that place was centered on Earth. This idea was deeply embedded in philosophy, religion, and everyday life. It was the ultimate truth. But in a quiet corner of Poland, a church official and astronomer named Nicolaus Copernicus was looking at the heavens and thinking something didn't add up. He spent decades observing the planets, tracking their strange movements across the night sky. Sometimes, planets like Mars seemed to move backward, a phenomenon called retrograde motion. The old Ptolemaic system explained this with incredibly complex cycles and epicycles, like wheels turning on other wheels. It was complicated and, to Copernicus, not very elegant. Copernicus had a radical, simpler idea. What if the sun, not the Earth, was at the center? What if the Earth was just another planet, spinning on its axis once a day and orbiting the sun once a year? This heliocentric model explained the planet's strange motions far more simply. The Earth, in its own orbit, would sometimes overtake another planet like Mars, making it appear to move backward from our perspective, just like a faster car passing a slower one. Copernicus knew how explosive this idea was. He was challenging centuries of established thought and, more importantly, the authority of the Church. He was so hesitant that he waited until he was on his deathbed in 1543 to publish his life's work on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres. The book was dense, mathematical, and written in Latin, so it wasn't exactly a bestseller. For a while, it circulated quietly among scholars and mathematicians. It was an interesting hypothesis, but not yet seen as a world-shattering threat. The fuse had been lit, but the explosion was yet to come. Now, fast forward about 70 years to Italy. Enter Galileo Galilei. Galileo wasn't just an astronomer, he was a brilliant physicist, a masterful inventor, and a fantastic communicator. He heard about a new invention from the Netherlands, the telescope. But instead of just using it to look at distant ships, Galileo did something revolutionary. He pointed it at the night sky. And what he saw changed everything. He looked at the moon and saw it wasn't a perfect, smooth orb like Aristotle had taught. It was covered in mountains and craters, just like the Earth. He looked at Jupiter and discovered 4 tiny moons orbiting it, a miniature solar system that didn't revolve around the Earth. This directly contradicted the idea that everything had to orbit our planet. He observed the phases of Venus, which cycled through crescents and full phases just like our moon. This could only happen if Venus orbited the Sun, not the Earth. The evidence was piling up, and it all pointed to one conclusion: Copernicus was right. And like Copernicus, Galileo wasn't content to keep this to himself. He was passionate and wanted everyone to know the truth. He wrote not just in academic Latin, but in everyday Italian, so that merchants, nobles, and ordinary people could understand his discoveries. He became a scientific superstar, celebrated across Europe. But his growing fame and his bold claims were making some very powerful people very nervous. In 1616, the Catholic Church's Inquisition decided to act. They declared the idea that the Earth moves to be foolish and absurd in philosophy, and formally heretical. Copernicus's book, On the Revolutions, was placed on the Index of Forbidden Books, where it would remain for nearly 200 years. Galileo was summoned to Rome and warned not to hold, teach, or defend the Copernican theory in any way whatsoever. For a while, Galileo stayed quiet. But the scientist in him couldn't let it go. He believed he could prove his case. In 1632, he published his masterpiece, dialogue concerning the two chief world systems. To get past the censors, he framed it as a neutral debate between three characters. One character, Salviati, argued for the Copernican system. Another, Simplicio, meaning simpleton, defended the old Ptolemaic view. And a third, Salgrado, was an intelligent layman who was usually convinced by Salviati's arguments. The book was a brilliant piece of writing, witty, clear, and utterly convincing. But it was also a huge miscalculation. The Pope at the time, Urban VIII, had once been a friend and supporter of Galileo. But when he read the book, he felt personally insulted. He believed that the foolish character, Simplicio, who consistently lost every argument, was a caricature of himself. The Pope was furious. The hammer came down hard. Galileo, now nearly 70 years old and in poor health, was summoned to Rome again, this time for trial by the Inquisition. He was accused of heresy. Under the threat of torture, the old man was forced to get on his knees and publicly renounce the ideas he knew to be true. He was forced to abjure, curse, and detest the error that the sun is the center of the world and that the earth moves. His dialogue was immediately banned. Galileo was sentenced to house arrest for the rest of his life. Legend has it that as he rose from his knees after his recantation, he muttered under his breath, "Eppur si muove," which means, "and yet it moves." The story is probably not true, but it perfectly captures the spirit of the moment. You can force a man to say something, but you can't force him to unknow it. You can ban a book, but you can't ban an idea whose time has come. Despite the ban, Galileo's and Copernicus's works were secretly copied and smuggled across Europe. Their ideas spread like wildfire. Other scientists like Johannes Kepler and later Isaac Newton built upon their foundations, solidifying the heliocentric model with the laws of planetary motion and universal gravitation. The dam had broken, and the truth could not be held back. The story of these banned books is more than just a chapter in the history of science. It's a powerful lesson about the struggle between tradition and discovery, between authority and free inquiry. It shows that progress often requires immense courage, the willingness to challenge what everyone else accepts as obvious truth. Galileo and Copernicus weren't just looking at the stars. They were showing humanity a new way to see itself not as the center of everything, but as part of a much larger, more magnificent cosmos. It took the Church a long time to catch up. Galileo was only formally cleared by the Vatican in 1992, over 350 years after his trial. But the truth had long since been accepted by the world. The Earth does spin, and it does orbit the sun. The ideas that were once so dangerous they had to be banned are now the first things we teach our children about the solar system. And that is the ultimate victory of science and the enduring power of a revolutionary idea. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the history of science and ideas. See you next time.